I booked the cabin because I needed to be alone. Things had gotten noisy in my life, noisy in a way that didn't involve sound. Work had built up. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. People around me seemed to always want something. It felt like I'd been talking nonstop for years. Like every time I opened my mouth, I had to either explain something or apologize. I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to answer another call. I didn't want to pretend to be interested in someone else's problems. I just wanted to be away from everything for a little while. The cabin was a tiny rental I found online. It wasn't fancy, just one room and a wood stove. No Wi-Fi, no TV, no running water either. The listing said it was 5 miles from the nearest paved road. That was the part one liked most. I didn't want to hear tires on asphalt or the echo of people yelling down a trail. I wanted quiet, the kind where you notice how loud the wind is in the trees or how sudden a bird call sounds when there's no background noise. I drove in late afternoon and left my car on a patch of gravel near the trailhead. It was mid-October, cold but not freezing yet. I carried my pack the rest of the way, walking down a narrow trail through thick pine. The cabin was set in a small clearing, surrounded on all sides by dense forest. The roof sagged a little and the walls leaned just slightly to the left, but it was solid. Someone had built it with care a long time ago. There was a woodpile off to the side, stacked high and covered in tarp, and a small outhouse about 30 feet into the trees. It was everything I wanted. I felt good about it the moment I saw it. The inside was just as basic. One bed frame, a table and 2 chairs, a shelf with some empty jars, a stove with a pile of firewood next to it, one little window. I brought my own sleeping bag, food, and a small propane burner for simple meals. I lit a fire and sat for a while that first night, listening to the stove crack and pop. That kind of silence, it does something to your head. It feels like your body starts to adjust its rhythm, like your brain finally lets go of all the noise it was holding on to without realizing. I went to bed early, wrapped tight in my bag, and slept like a rock. In the morning, I noticed something strange. The cabin door was open, not cracked, not swinging a little, wide open, like someone had pushed it all the way open in the night. Cold air was inside. A few dead leaves had blown in. My first thought was that maybe I didn't close it all the way, but I remembered shutting it. I remembered the click of the latch. I always check those things, especially when I'm somewhere remote. I didn't think much more about it. I figured maybe the latch hadn't fully caught or something shifted as the cabin warmed up from the fire. Wood moves with temperature. I'd heard that before, so I chalked it up to the wind and forgot it. The next night, I did everything the same. Lit a fire, read for a while, then rolled into my bag and slept. In the morning, the door was shut this time, but something else was off. My boots, which I always kept just inside the door on the right, had been moved. They were sitting on the left side of the doorway, pointing a different direction. Not kicked or knocked over, just moved, like someone had picked them up, turned them, and set them back down. I stared at them for a long time. There's a difference between chaos and order. When something falls over or gets knocked, you can see that randomness in how it lays. But when something's been handled, there's a kind of unnatural neatness to it. I opened the door and looked around. Nothing outside. The firewood stack looked untouched. My food was sealed up in containers, untouched. Nothing else inside was out of place. Still, something about the boots stuck in my mind all day. I tried to settle down that evening, but my thoughts kept turning over. I went out to the woodpile before sunset and noticed the logs looked different. The stack was still high and covered, but the top layer didn't match what I remembered. There were bark pieces that hadn't been there the day before, and a few of the logs looked freshly added. The kind of small, clean-cut logs someone splits from around right before using them. I hadn't added any wood since I arrived. I stayed up that night. I didn't light a fire, just sat in the dark with my flashlight off and my eyes open. I watched the door. I listened. At first, it was just wind, small creaks in the walls, the usual things you hear in old wooden places. But then, sometime around 2 or 3 a.m., I heard something. A shift, a step maybe. It came from the back side of the cabin, near the woodpile. It was a soft sound, but clear. Someone moving carefully. I stayed still. No flashlight, no movement, just listening. Another faint noise followed. This one was closer, right up against the cabin wall. Not brushing, not scraping, just a subtle pressure. A body pushing slightly against wood. Then nothing. I waited for hours. When the sun finally rose, I stepped outside. I checked around the cabin again. No footprints, no disturbed leaves. The firewood stack looked the same as the day before, slightly different on top. The air smelled cold and pine-sweet. Nothing looked wrong, but I knew something was. That afternoon, I took a walk around the area. I made big loops, moving slow, watching the ground. I looked for signs that anyone else had been nearby. I saw old boot prints near the trail, probably from past hikers, but nothing fresh. I kept going farther out until I was well away from the cabin and then made a wide circle back in, coming up from a different direction. That evening, I lit a fire again, but I didn't sleep. I lay in my bag with my hand on my flashlight, staring at the door. Around midnight, it opened. No noise, no footsteps, just the door slowly swinging inward about 6 inches before stopping. I jumped up and shined the light outside. Nothing, not a thing, but something had pushed that door open. The air outside was dead still, no wind at all. I stood there for a long time, light sweeping across trees, the side of the cabin, the ground. Nothing moved. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I felt raw. My eyes stung, my thoughts felt slow. I boiled some water for instant coffee and sat on the steps outside. That's when I noticed something else. There were scratches on the frame of the cabin, low to the ground, near the back corner. Not animal scratches, not claws. They were too straight. They looked like marks from a knife or metal edge, like someone had been trying to wedge something open. I followed them downward and noticed a slight gap near the base of the wall, hidden behind the lower edge of the firewood stack. I cleared some logs away and crouched down. There was a space under the cabin, a crawl space. I had seen the raised foundation but assumed it was just for ventilation or drainage. I didn't expect there to be an actual open space underneath, but there was. It was dark down there. The opening was narrow, but big enough for someone to slide in. I grabbed my flashlight again and leaned down. What I saw made my stomach drop. There were blankets. Tucked into the far side, barely visible in the beam of the light, was a small pile of cloth, blankets, clothes maybe, crumpled. Beside them, a plastic jug of water, some food wrappers, a boot. Someone had been living under the cabin. I backed up slowly. My first instinct was to call someone, but I had no cell service. I packed my things fast. I left the firewood half-stacked, my sleeping bag loose, and didn't look back. I hiked fast, heart pounding the whole way, and drove straight out without stopping. I reported everything to the sheriff's office when I got back to town. They sent someone out to check the property. A deputy called me a few days later. He told me they found evidence someone had been staying under the cabin, what I saw, plus some more food, a tarp, a knife, a few empty cans. But no person. Whoever it was, they were long gone by the time the deputy got there. They didn't find prints, no name, no ID. Just signs someone had lived there for a while. Long enough to make a small home under the floor I'd been sleeping on. Long enough to watch me come and go. Long enough to know my routine. To open the door at night, shift things around, and slip back under without being caught. The sheriff figured it was probably a drifter or someone squatting out there. Maybe dangerous, maybe not. Could have been someone avoiding people. Could have been someone watching for something else. They didn't know. I didn't ask. I haven't been back to that area since. I still go camping sometimes, but never alone, and never in cabins. Not anymore. I'd rather be in a tent in the open woods, where I can see every side, every shadow, because I learned something out there, something that's never really left me. The scariest part isn't when something's missing or moved or broken. The scariest part is when everything seems almost exactly the way you left it, just slightly off, because that's how you know someone's been there, and they wanted you to know it. We hadn't been up to the cabin in a few years. Life just got in the way, school, work, stuff that fills your days until months slip by. But we finally carved out a week in the summer to go back. The cabin had been in my wife's family for decades, way out near the edge of a national forest in northern Minnesota. No neighbors close by, just trees, a winding gravel road, a still lake, and a small wood frame cabin with green shutters that needed repainting. We brought the kids this time, both under 10, and that made it different. I'd been to the cabin before, mostly in my 20s, and back then it was about fishing and drinking and doing nothing. Now, with kids, it was about Esmore's bedtime routines, mosquito spray, and making sure no one got lost in the woods. I liked the change, though. I liked watching my son chase frogs near the water. I liked hearing my daughter laugh every time we lit the fire pit. The first few nights were perfect. It was warm during the day, cool at night. We cooked over the grill, watched stars, and got sunburned on the dock. The cabin was simple. One main room with a kitchen area, a wood stove, 2 small bedrooms, and a narrow bathroom with a water heater that only worked when it felt like it. There was no Wi-Fi, no TV, no cell signal. That was the point. On the 4th night, I stepped outside around 10 just to stretch and check on the firewood stack. The kids were in bed, my wife was reading. I heard crickets, the soft wind moving through the trees, the usual. I turned to go back in when I noticed something down near the tree line across the gravel road, maybe 40 yards out. A light. It flickered for a second, low to the ground, like someone had a flashlight and dropped it. I paused. Then it moved, slow and horizontal, like someone walking with a flashlight pointed forward. At first I figured it was another cabin owner, maybe someone out for a walk or checking their own setup. Then I remembered there were no other cabins within half a mile, and the access road was a dead end. You didn't come out here unless you were visiting a very specific place. This place. The flashlight disappeared behind a tree. I stood there waiting. After a minute, I called out. Just a loud, firm, "Hey!" Nothing. The light went out. I waited maybe 10 more seconds, walked a little down the gravel road. Still nothing. No sound. I turned back toward the cabin and stood on the porch another few minutes. I didn't see the light again. I went back inside. I told myself it was probably someone lost or a ranger or a hunter, even though it wasn't hunting season. Either way, I didn't want to freak anyone out. I didn't tell my wife. She had trouble sleeping in unfamiliar places to begin with. I figured if I didn't see it again, I'd let it go. But I saw it again. The next night, around the same time, I looked out the front window before going to bed and saw 2 lights this time. 2 distinct flashlight beams moving slowly behind the trees across the road. They moved like they were scanning the forest floor. One turned upward and lit up a branch for a second before dipping back down. They weren't walking together either. They were about 20 feet apart, weaving slowly through the woods. Again, I stepped out onto the porch and called out, louder this time. Again, both lights went dark. No sound. I waited almost 15 minutes this time, not moving, just standing there in the dark. I didn't see or hear anything else. Now it felt wrong. I locked the front door, which we normally left open out here. I checked the windows. I debated waking up my wife, but didn't. I barely slept. Every time I thought I heard a twig snap, I held my breath and stared at the ceiling. The next day, I walked a few hundred yards into the woods across the road. I didn't find anything. No trash, no footprints. Not that I expected any. This forest was dry and thick with pine needles. I could have missed signs even if they were there. Still, something about it was bothering me more than I wanted to admit. It wasn't just the lights. It was the way they moved. Slow and careful, like someone was looking for something. Or watching. That night, I didn't wait for the lights. I sat out on the porch with a flashlight and my old hunting rifle across my lap. I didn't tell anyone. The kids were asleep, and my wife thought I just wanted to listen to the night sounds. I listened, all right. Around 10:30, they were back. 3 lights this time, one farther out than the others, like someone had circled around toward the lakeside of the cabin. That one concerned me the most. The other 2 stayed in the same area as before, sweeping the forest floor, occasionally pausing behind trees. They never came closer than 30 yards, but they were too close already. I sat dead still, rifle across my knees, flashlight off. I didn't call out this time. I just watched. After about 5 minutes, they disappeared again. All three lights blinked out within seconds of each other. I kept waiting, thinking they'd come back. They didn't. I went back inside around midnight and stayed up the rest of the night. I heard nothing, saw nothing else. The next day, I told my wife. She didn't take it well. She thought we should leave. I agreed, but something about it also made me want to stay. I didn't like being pushed off a place that had been in her family so long. I didn't like the idea of someone creeping around at night while we packed up and drove off. I needed to know more. I told her we'd leave in the morning. That night, I moved one of the armchairs in front of the window and sat there with the rifle and a notepad. I wrote down the time and direction of every flashlight I saw. For this time, for separate flashlights, spaced out. One circled behind the cabin this time, moving between the back window and the woodshed. That one stayed the farthest back, maybe just at the edge of view, but it was there. I only saw it twice, 2 short flickers of white light and then nothing. The others did their usual slow sweep, paused, then vanished. I didn't sleep. In the morning, I went outside and walked a wide loop through the woods, moving slowly, trying to stay quiet. I checked for any sign of people, broken branches, boot prints, cigarette butts. Nothing. The forest was dense but silent, like it didn't want to share its secrets. We packed the car later that day. The kids didn't know anything was wrong. My wife barely spoke. Before we left, I nailed a piece of plywood over the front door. I didn't even know why, like it would stop whoever it was from coming in. We didn't go back the next summer, or the one after that. 2 years later, I drove back up alone in late fall. The trees were bare, the air cold. I parked on the old gravel road and walked the last stretch to the cabin. The plywood was gone. The door was open, not broken, just open. Inside, everything looked mostly the same, except the blankets were missing from the beds. The drawers were all empty. The food we'd left, cans and dry stuff, was gone. Nothing else. No vandalism. No trash, just used. Someone had been staying there. I backed out slowly and left. I didn't touch anything. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? I haven't been back since. We talk about selling the place sometimes, but we never get around to it. Sits up there, quiet and hidden, waiting. Someone else might be there now. Someone who likes the woods at night. Someone who never knocks. Someone who disappears when the light hits them. I don't think they ever wanted to hurt us. I think they were just waiting for us to leave, and we did. We booked the cabin through one of those rental apps. It looked nice in the photos, simple, clean, surrounded by woods in some remote part of northern Michigan. The listing described it as a secluded, peaceful getaway, with no neighbors for miles and the perfect place to unplug. That was the main reason we picked it. My girlfriend and I had been working too much, too fast, and we needed something slow, something quiet. The cabin looked like it offered that. We arrived late in the afternoon after a 6-hour drive. The last leg of the route was a dirt road that ran through a dense patch of forest. The trees were thick on both sides, their limbs crowding the sky until it felt like we were driving into a tunnel. No cell service, no radio, just the gravel kicking up under the tires and the branches scraping the side mirrors. We didn't say much on the way in. She was tired. I was focused on the road. When we pulled up, the place looked smaller than in the photos. More weathered too. The paint on the siding had started to peel, and there was moss on the shingles. But it wasn't bad, just older. The driveway was just a patch of dirt and leaves. The porch creaked when we stepped on it. There was a key in a lockbox by the door. Inside, it smelled faintly like cedar and old smoke. There was a small kitchen to the right, a living room with a couch and a coffee table, and a wood stove in the corner. A narrow hall led to the bedroom and bathroom. There was also a loft space above the living room with a ladder going up to it. That part was more for kids or extra guests. We didn't plan on using it. We dropped our bags and looked around. Everything seemed fine. Simple. The cabin had that bare-bones feel, with mismatched furniture, dusty shelves, and a few blankets thrown over the arms of the couch. The windows had curtains, but they were thin and didn't really block the view in or out. The floorboards creaked when you walked, especially in the hallway. I remember noticing right away that the floors sounded odd in one particular spot. It was near the entrance to the bedroom. When I stepped there, the floor gave a bit too much, and there was a kind of hollow echo underneath. At first, I thought maybe it was just a space between support beams or an air gap in the insulation. Cabins like this weren't built perfectly. I didn't think much of it. That first night, we made a fire in the stove and ate microwave burritos from the little freezer. It got cold quickly once the sun went down. The trees outside pressed in close to the windows. There were no sounds except the wind and the occasional cracking of wood shifting in the cold. We played cards on the coffee table and went to bed early. I woke up once in the night, just before dawn. It was dead quiet, but I had this strange feeling like something had shifted in the cabin while I slept. I couldn't explain it, but the air felt heavier. I stayed still for a while, listening. There was nothing. No footsteps, no creaks, just silence. Eventually, I fell back asleep. The next morning was clear and cold. I walked outside to breathe a little and stretch my legs. I looked around the base of the cabin. It sat maybe 3 feet off the ground, on cement blocks and wooden beams. There was a crawl space underneath it, completely enclosed by old plywood skirting. Some of the wood had gone soft and was starting to rot near the bottom. I noticed a section on the side had been patched with newer wood and bent nails. It didn't match the rest. Inside, while she made breakfast, I walked across the spot in the hallway again, the one where the floor sounded hollow. I pressed down with my heel and listened. There was definitely an empty space under that part. I started to wonder how big the crawl space was. Later that afternoon, I grabbed a flashlight and went outside to look under the cabin again. I pulled back some loose plywood near the patched section and saw that it wasn't sealed very well. The underside was dark, with cobwebs hanging from the joists and old insulation sagging in strips. The flashlight beam caught on something in the back, what looked like a blanket or tarp. I got down on my knees and crawled in a few feet, enough to see better. The floor under the cabin was just dirt, dry and packed. There were footprints in the dust. Not animal tracks, actual shoe prints. A lot of them. I froze for a second, holding my breath. The prints led toward the center of the cabin, toward that soft spot in the floor. I followed them, moving slow, keeping the flashlight steady. That's when I saw it. There was a small wooden platform set between the joists, maybe 3 feet wide, like someone had built it to keep their belongings off the dirt. On the platform was a stack of old blankets, some food wrappers, and an empty water jug. There were also a few tin cans, a spoon, and what looked like the torn-out guts of a battery-powered lantern. It looked like someone had been living there. Not recently, maybe, but not years ago either. The food wrappers weren't moldy or soaked through. The blankets were dusty but not chewed up by animals. And then I noticed the weirdest part. There was a kind of handmade shelf nailed to one of the floor joists. On it sat several items: half-used candles, a lighter, a notebook with no cover, and a pair of scissors. I pulled back quickly and crawled out, breathing hard. My shirt was covered in dust. Back inside, I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure how to explain it. She was reading on the couch and looked up when I came in, but I just shook my head and said I needed a shower. I stood in there for a while, letting the water run hot, trying to shake the image of the shelf, the way it looked so deliberate, so personal. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound made me flinch. The creaking of the floorboards, the wind pushing against the siding, even the click of the wood stove expanding as it cooled. I kept staring at the ceiling, thinking about the crawl space. I couldn't stop imagining someone still down there. Not someone from years ago, someone who had left and planned to come back. Maybe they thought the place was abandoned. Maybe they didn't know it was rented out. The next morning, I went back out there with gloves and a better flashlight. I crawled in deeper this time and checked more of the space. There were little signs of movement everywhere. Fingerprints in the dust, a path worn smooth in the dirt, a few scraps of paper with faded writing on them. The notebook was filled with random notes, not quite journal entries, just phrases and numbers. A few pages had lists. I flipped through, my gloves making it awkward. One page just said over and over again, "Wait till dark." It was written in different styles of handwriting, or maybe just with different pressure. Some lines were shaky, Some were nearly etched into the paper. That was the moment I knew we had to leave. I crawled out fast, grabbed a shovel from the woodpile, and used it to board the skirting back up tight. I nailed the loose piece down and packed rocks and branches against it. I didn't want anything getting in or out. Back inside, I started packing. She asked what I was doing. I said I didn't feel safe, that I thought someone had been living under the cabin. She thought I was being paranoid at first, but I showed her the notebook. I didn't say much, just handed it to her and let her read. After that, she didn't ask anything else. We loaded up the car and left by noon. I didn't even bother telling the rental owner. I figured they probably already knew, or didn't care. On the drive out, I kept looking in the mirror. There was no one following us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd been watched the whole time. Not just from the woods, from beneath us, from inside that crawl space. Later, when we got home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to forget, but I kept picturing the shelf, the folded blankets, the notebook. I kept imagining footsteps underneath us while we slept. I remembered that feeling I had the first night, the sense that something had changed in the air. I think now it was real. I think whoever had been living there had come back. Maybe not all the way, but enough to watch, enough to listen. I checked the listing a few weeks later. It was still up. New reviews, all 5 stars. One of them mentioned quirky floor sounds and a cozy, quiet vibe. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if anyone else had noticed the hollow spot, wondering if the person who wrote that review had ever checked beneath the cabin. I didn't write a review. I just closed the tab and walked away. Sometimes at night, I still wake up and listen. Not for wind, not for animals, but for the sound of someone crawling underneath me, just in case. I needed to get away. After months of relentless work and personal setbacks, solitude seemed like the only remedy. I found a listing for a secluded cabin in the northern woods, far from any town or neighbor. The photos showed a modest structure surrounded by dense forest, a place where one could truly be alone. The drive took hours, transitioning from highways to gravel roads, and finally to a narrow dirt path barely wide enough for my car. Trees loomed overhead, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. The air grew cooler, tinged with the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves. When I arrived, the cabin stood as expected. Weathered wood, a stone chimney, and a small porch with a single rocking chair. Inside, it was sparse but sufficient. A bed, a table, a wood-burning stove, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. There was no electricity, no running water, and no cell service. Just the silence of the woods. The first day passed peacefully. I unpacked, chopped some firewood, and prepared a simple meal. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional snap of a twig. I found comfort in these noises, reminders that life persisted beyond my own. On the second day, I ventured deeper into the woods, following a faint trail that meandered through the trees. I marveled at the untouched beauty, ferns unfurling, mushrooms sprouting from fallen logs, and the play of light through the branches. But as I turned to head back, I noticed something odd. A tree with bark stripped in long vertical gouges. The marks were too uniform to be natural, and I couldn't recall seeing them on my way in. That night, I struggled to sleep. The usual forest sounds were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. I lay in bed, ears straining for any sign of life. Then, faintly, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. It seemed to come from the porch. I held my breath, heart pounding, but the sound ceased as abruptly as it had begun. Morning brought little relief. I stepped outside to find the rocking chair slightly askew, as if someone had sat in it and left it angled differently. I dismissed it as my own oversight, though unease settled in my stomach. Determined to shake off the paranoia, I spent the day gathering firewood and reading. But as dusk approached, I noticed footprints near the edge of the clearing, boot prints, not mine, leading toward the cabin but not away. They were fresh, the edges crisp in the soft earth. I decided to stay inside that night, securing the door and windows as best I could. I kept the fire low, not wanting to cast too much light. Again, the forest was silent. Then, the tapping returned, louder this time, more insistent. It moved along the wall from the porch to the side of the cabin. I sat frozen, gripping a fireplace poker, until the sounds faded. Sleep eluded me. The first light, I ventured outside. The footprints were back, more numerous, circling the cabin. I found a small pile of stones stacked neatly by the door, a formation I hadn't made. Panic set in. Someone was out there watching, toying with me. I packed my belongings hastily, intent on leaving. But when I reached the dirt path, a fallen tree blocked the way. It hadn't been there before. The cut was clean, deliberate. Someone had felled it to trap me. With no other option, I returned to the cabin, barricading the door and windows. I rationed my food and water, unsure how long I'd need to stay. Days passed in a blur of fear and vigilance. Each night, the tapping resumed, now accompanied by whispers and the occasional thud against the walls. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. On the 5th day, I heard a vehicle approaching, a low rumble growing louder. I peeked through a crack in the boarded window to see a pickup truck pulling into the clearing. 2 men stepped out, dressed in camouflage, rifles slung over their shoulders. Relief washed over me. I emerged cautiously, explaining my situation. They listened, expressions unreadable, then offered to help clear the fallen tree. As we worked, I noticed one of them glance at the cabin, a smirk playing on his lips. A chill ran down my spine. Once the path was cleared, I didn't look back. I drove until the forest gave way to open fields and the signal bars returned to my phone. I reported the incident to the authorities, but with no evidence, there was little they could do. I later learned that the cabin had a history. Previous renters had reported similar experiences. Strange noises, signs of intrusion, and feelings of being watched. Some believed it was locals playing pranks. Others suspected more sinister motives. I don't know who or what was out there, but I do know this. The woods are vast, and not all who dwell within them have good intentions. I sought solitude and found something else entirely. I won't return. Some places are best left alone. I needed to get away. After months of relentless work, personal setbacks, and the constant hum of city life, solitude seemed like the only remedy. I found a listing for a secluded cabin in the northern woods, far from any town or neighbor. The photos showed a modest structure surrounded by dense forest, a place where one could truly be alone. The drive took hours, transitioning from highways to gravel roads, and finally to a narrow dirt path barely wide enough for my car. Trees loomed overhead, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. The air grew cooler, tinged with the earthy scent of moss and decaying leaves. When I arrived, the cabin stood as expected. Weathered wood, a stone chimney, and a small porch with a single rocking chair. Inside, it was sparse but sufficient. A bed, a table, a wood-burning stove, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. There was no electricity, no running water, and no cell service. Just the silence of the woods. The first day passed peacefully. I unpacked, chopped some firewood, and prepared a simple meal. As night fell, the forest came alive with sounds. The distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional snap of a twig. I found comfort in these noises, reminders that life persisted beyond my own. On the second day, I ventured deeper into the woods, following a faint trail that meandered through the trees. I marveled at the untouched beauty, ferns unfurling, mushrooms sprouting from fallen logs, and the play of light through the branches. But as I turned to head back, I noticed something odd. A tree with bark stripped in long vertical gouges. The marks were too uniform to be natural, and I couldn't recall seeing them on my way in. That night, I struggled to sleep. The usual forest sounds were absent, replaced by an oppressive silence. I lay in bed, ears straining for any sign of life. Then, faintly, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. It seemed to come from the porch. I held my breath, heart pounding, but the sound ceased as abruptly as it had begun. Morning brought little relief. I stepped outside to find the rocking chair slightly askew, as if someone had sat in it and left it angled differently. I dismissed it as my own oversight, though unease settled in my stomach. Determined to shake off the paranoia, I spent the day gathering firewood and reading. But as dusk approached, I noticed footprints near the edge of the clearing, boot prints, not mine, leading toward the cabin but not away. They were fresh, the edges crisp in the soft earth. I decided to stay inside that night, securing the door and windows as best I could. I kept the fire low, not wanting to cast too much light. Again, the forest was silent. Then, the tapping returned, louder this time, more insistent. It moved along the wall from the porch to the side of the cabin. I sat frozen, gripping a fireplace poker, until the sounds faded. Sleep eluded me. To first light, I ventured outside. The footprints were back, more numerous, circling the cabin. I found a small pile of stones stacked neatly by the door, a formation I hadn't made. Panic set in. Someone was out there watching, toying with me. I packed my belongings hastily, intent on leaving. But when I reached the dirt path, a fallen tree blocked the way. It hadn't been there before. The cut was clean, deliberate. Someone had felled it to trap me. With no other option, I returned to the cabin, barricading the door and windows. I rationed my food and water, unsure how long I'd need to stay. Days passed in a blur of fear and vigilance. Each night, the tapping resumed, now accompanied by whispers and the occasional thud against the walls. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. On the fifth day, I heard a vehicle approaching, a low rumble growing louder. I peeked through a crack in the boarded window to see a pickup truck pulling into the clearing. Two men stepped out, dressed in camouflage, rifles slung over their shoulders. Relief washed over me. I emerged cautiously, explaining my situation. They listened, expressions unreadable, then offered to help clear the fallen tree. As we worked, I noticed one of them glance at the cabin, a smirk playing on his lips. A chill ran down my spine. Once the path was cleared, I didn't look back. I drove until the forest gave way to open fields and the signal bars returned to my phone. I reported the incident to the authorities, but with no evidence, there was little they could do. I later learned that the cabin had a history. Previous renters had reported similar experiences. Strange noises, signs of intrusion, and feelings of being watched. Some believed it was locals playing pranks. Others suspected more sinister motives. I don't know who or what was out there, but I do know this. The woods are vast, and not all who dwell within them have good intentions. I sought solitude and found something else entirely. I won't return. Some places are best left alone.